Well, hello, my lovelies. It's Countess, and I'm back with another video for you guys. And as always, I hope it finds you well. Yeah, so this is going to be just kind of a fun, lighthearted video, and mainly it is anybody who is a lover or an admirer of the tarot. I would assume most of you out there who are subscribed to my channel are Beatles fans. I got this just yesterday. The Beatles Tarot deck. I had shared a YouTube kind of preview about the deck on my community tab a couple weeks ago. This box is really neat. You can see I'm looking through you. And this one is Tomorrow Never Knows. What goes on? What is life? And then just I'm going to show you real quick. You're gonna the deck itself is just a trip. A literal trip. The back of the cards. See? Okay, so you just spread them out. They're just like made of this really trippy, like kaleidoscope kind of design, and it's very mesmerizing. And then you can see this is, the deck. I picked out about 16 cards just to kind of quickly go over with you guys. This deck is beautiful. It was a little bit pricey, yes, but the guy I got it from, I initially had purchased it on Etsy, and something happened with that transaction, so Etsy ended up canceling it. So I ended up going to his website, which he is, his company, or the company he prints for, is Welkin Tarot. So check them out, guys. Like the tarot decks that they have are awesome. They even have a really cool Elvis deck, and I'm thinking about getting that one as well. So anyways, I had this trip up with Etsy, so I ended up going and buying the deck off of his website, and it was like $7 more than what Etsy was charging. To my surprise, I mean, I paid it because I really wanted the deck, and I paid it, and to my surprise, he refunded me that $7. So really cool, just an overall good experience. And this deck comes with a guide. And this guide, you can see all of my place marks. I picked about 16 cards out. I just want to, and I thought I would tell you what, just snippets of what these cards represent, because they are similar to the classic Rider-Waite-Smith decks. However, they have a few goodies extra in there that correlate to Beatle and solo material. And it's all just kind of combined in this deck. It's very beautiful. So if you guys want to check it out, I highly suggest you do, because it's fun. And I've already done a few readings for myself on it. And yeah, it's really cool. So we're going to go over this. I'm going to show you. We're going to switch over to the other side, as I like to say. And I'm going to show you guys these cards. And I'm going to give you just a quick, kind of paragraph or two about what these cards represent in coordinates to the Beatles tarot, like Rider-Waite-Smith aside. I want to, highlight the extra goodies, as it were. So if you'd like to join me, please do. It's like a fun little, I don't know, these cards are beautiful, and I think they would even be nice to just buy and then maybe frame. Like I was thinking about getting another deck and like framing them, and like to put up in my living room or something. I don't know. It's they're just beautiful, and I had an overall just fantastic experience. So I just wanted to share this with you guys because I'm sure most of you out there who are subscribed to me are in some way, shape, or some shape or form, excuse me, Beatles fans like myself. So, yeah, they're just fun to look at too and fun to see. They're like collages, and some of them are a little strange, but then once you get the sort of like description from the guidebook, the imagery and stuff starts to make sense. So, all right, guys, I will see you on the other side, and we will take a look at the Beatles Tarot. All right, guys, we're just gonna start with just a little bit of information from the intro. And I apologize if you hear any like background buzzing or whatnot. I have to have my fan on today, so yeah, that's what that is. So yeah, let's start with the intro. Just explaining a few things about this tarot deck. So there had to be something archetypal going on, some magical combination of forces that resonated deep within the collective unconscious of the whole species. How else can we account for the sheer magnitude of astounding worldwide success of the Beatles and the fever pitch of Beatlemania? The enduring popularity of the tarot for more than 5 centuries is perhaps equally confounding. The Beatles tarot works from the assumption that both the band and the cards draw their power from a common source. Some parallels are fairly clear. The minor key, 4 suits, 4 Beatles. The major key, the band itself. The quintessence, the whole greater than the sum of its parts, the Beatles. But the trajectory of the band's career and private lives of each of its members provided many more examples of the way in which the symbolism of the tarot and actual historical events share repeated patterns. Quote, I always say, unquote, said Paul. The Beatles were like a box. If you take one side, the whole thing collapses. Of course, with apologies to Paul, boxes generally have 6 sides. Yes, 6 sides to a cube. The top of the bottom must be above and the bottom below, for the ruling maxim of Hermetic philosophy, which is crucial to an understanding of the Western tradition of divination and occultism, is as above, so below, as within, so without. That is, the spiritual world and the material world echo one another because they are, in reality, not 2 worlds, but one. The dynamics of the Kabbalistic cube of space are also pertinent here. The 6-sided box brings dice to mind, and shuffling cards and rolling dice allow us to enter a domain ruled by chance, or at least one not ruled by human will. If we total the number on a die's 6 faces, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, we get 21. 2 plus 1 is 3. The number of cards in the tarot's major arcana Gambling is addictive because when we are winning, we feel that God or Lady Luck or someone is smiling down on us for once. Winning should be mere coincidence, not a sign of divine grace. And if the universe is an unthinking machine that science insists, and yet something urges us to see beyond what passes for chance. Okay, so we're going to venture now into the guide for the cards. And like I said, I only picked out about 16 cards to go over with you guys just to kind of keep it brief, but they're very fascinating, and the symbolism that's being used and what they say. So the suits go as follows. So we start with Ringo, who is representing the wands, but in the Beatles tarot, the wands are called the sticks, as in drumsticks. And then we go to George, who represents cups, and cups are cups in this deck, but they're the emotions, right? And then we go to John, and John is represented by words. Swords minus the S in the front. I thought that was very clever. And because of his sharp wit and whatnot. And then we get to McCartney, who represents the pentacles, or in this deck, the pennies, which I think is very cute and very English. Okay, so the card that I pulled for Ringo is the Eight of Sticks. So Ringo Starr is now an established star, but he is being held captive inside his own stardom. A comment on how much things have changed, that John could become a target of ridicule by making a casual observation that the Beatles were bigger than Jesus. An indisputable numerical fact in terms of worldwide popularity, whereas Ringo could show himself crucified by fame and hardly raise a murmur of recognition, let alone complaint. Many know about the death threats John received after his comments about the Beatles' popularity and Jesus, and that ultimately contributed to his murder. But fewer people know about the death threats that Ringo received during the band's 1964 world tour. Arriving in Montreal for a performance later that day, radical French-Canadian separatists threatened to kill the, quote, Jewish Beatle, unquote. Despite his distinctive nose and penchant for jewelry, Ringo is not now, nor never was, a member of the Jewish community. The star we see Ringo crucified in here may suggest the Star of David, or the Seal of Solomon, or the hexagram, and the very real sense of undeserved persecution. Likewise, the Eight of Sticks is arguably the card of being careful of what you wish for. Yes, the age-old cliche. Now we're going to move over to the cups with George, and I picked two cards out of his suit to show you guys. So we're going to start off with the Four of Cups, which in general is the card of like depression and despair. So let's see what they say. So there is one car that's white, and there is one black, one coming, one going, suggesting choice and uncertainty. The image is from the Magical Mystery Tour. the video of Blue Jay Way, named after the street in the Hollywood Hills where George was staying when he wrote the song. It sounds intentionally groggy and struck on one note because he wrote it all while suffering from jet lag, struggling to stay awake while waiting for his friend Derek Taylor, the Beatles' publicity officer, who was held up in LA traffic. On that trip, George visited the Haight-Ashbury and was appalled at the spectacle of so many lost people overindulging in drugs and idiocy. This may be part of the 4 cups of malaise, indulgence, surfeit, and pointlessness. Mimicking the Rider-Waite-Smith, the 4 of Cups, there are 3 styrofoam coffee cups on the ground to his right, and a variation of the godlike hand appears above his head holding an early movie camera and the logo for the movie company George founded called Handmade Films, originally formed to finance Monty Python's The Life of Brian, one of the very best movies ever made, by the way. And that's coming from me, a Christian. Yes. Handmade Films revived George's creative enthusiasm, and the company went on to produce many other fine films. The Beatles tarot is suggesting that if the Rider-Waite-Smith character overcomes his lethargy and grasps the new cup being offered to him, he may be surprised at the pleasure it brings. The image above his head in the sky is like a vision or thought bubble of inspiration, but unlike a drug hallucination, Handmade Films was a genuine inspiration. After that trip to LA, George renounced LSD in favor of meditation, and his song It's All Too Much reflects this sentiment. All right, so moving on, we're going to move over to John and the suit of the words. John is posed in his kitchen at home with his first wife, Cynthia, and their young son, Julian. It is an image of deliberately exaggerated domesticity, echoing Grant Wood's painting American Gothic. John and Cynthia, whose marriage was constantly rumored to be on the rocks, are proudly asserting that their relationship is immune to the temptations and self-indulgent glamour of the rock and roll lifestyle. John is holding a gardening tool rather than an oar, and Cynthia is holding a mop and balancing their son Julian on her knee. One of the nicknames of the Beatles, on account of the trademark hairstyle, was the mop tops. The plant on the table is a mop top too, a mini mop top, like little Julian perhaps. There are 6 bottles of beer on the table, and that's not the start of some cheesy song. Behind them instead of 6 swords, because John was drinking a lot during this period to avoid facing his own dissatisfaction with his partnership with Cynthia, at a time when the world was at its feet and he had every opportunity for fun. Like the boatman from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the 6 of Swords, who has his back to the viewer, John turned his back on domesticity, home life. Here, at any rate. Later, when living with Yoko in New York with their son Sean, he transformed himself into a ferociously devoted house husband, perhaps partly to assuage the guilt he felt over the abandonment of his first family. The gloomy aquatic background makes it look as though the kitchen might be sinking. Yoko, the ocean child from the land of the rising sun, is looming above the horizon. And that's just a very scary visual. And just like imagination wise. All right. So we're going to basically turn the page and go to the 7 of Swords, which I found this card very interesting. Each headline on this newspaper on the card is the title of a song on an album, and the articles beneath are lyrics of each song. John's idea for the album was to treat it like a daily newspaper, and this is his album Sometime in New York City, with each song written about a topical issue and recorded the same day. There are 7 arms on the card instead of 7 swords, punning the idea of arms as weapons. Instead of holding aloft a flaming torch emanating light, Lady Liberty is waving an arm in the air, which has somehow been ripped from herself. Okay, it's so weird. And then with 1972 being the first year 18-year-olds could vote, John planned to tour the United States on a Defeat Nixon tour. As a result, Nixon put him on a hate list. The FBI monitored his activities around the clock for years and blocked his attempts to get his green card. But thanks to the persistent pressure from his supporters, the general public, not to mention the many TV and newspaper interviews given by John and Yoko pleading their case, the U.S. government was eventually embarrassed into officially allowing John to live and work legally in America. He immediately exercised his new status by putting in several studious, some might say gloating, appearances at the Nixon Watergate hearings to observe the sight of his longtime tormentor in the hot seat. I really, really like that. I like how this book gives like little tidbits of uh, trivia, if it were. Okay, so the last card in the suit of words is the 9 of words. Okay, so on this card is the view from John and Yoko's apartment window overlooking the jagged, sword-like skyline of New York City, the seething capital of the world, a spiral galaxy of desire and despair. Yoko took the photograph. The fragility of the glass tells us something about her emotional state. The blood-stained glasses are the ones John was wearing when he was shot. The woman in the row, the Rider-Waite-Smith 9 of Swords card, covers her eyes, suggesting a mind shut to the outside world. But the Beatles tarot card emphasizes transparency. In previous cards, Yoko has been blindfolded. Now her vision is panoramic. The glass of water, half empty or half full, is a distorting medium. Water relates to emotion. Yoko means ocean child, so perhaps Yoko is the vertically upright glass, weeping, and John is the horizontal spectacles in representation. The number 9 at the top of the card, which reappears inverted as the number 6 in the Lover's card, is from a drawing of a football player John drew as a boy, which was used for the cover of his Walls and Bridges album, which was made during his Lost Weekend. This was the name he gave to the 18-month period following his split from Yoko in the summer of 1973. During this time, he was living in LA with May Pang, their personal assistant, and devoting his energy almost exclusively to drinking, doing drugs, partying, and slowly going mad. The number 9 drawn during the number 9 drawn during John's childhood in Liverpool suggests another song from that album, Number 9 Dream. Such a beautiful song, which peaked at number 9 on the British charts. And in the song, Pang sings in the background and calls out, John, the singer. The song's refrain, I don't know exactly how that goes. I know it sounds a little bit like, my sweet Lord, hallelujah. I don't know. I could be wrong. That's just what I'm hearing in my head. So that refrain is 9 syllables. And it came to John in a dream while he was working on Nielsen's Pussycats album. 9 was John's number. He was born on October 9th. His first house was at number 9 Newcastle Road. The names Liverpool, McCartney, and Sutcliffe all have 9 letters. The Beatles lasted 9 years. Their first cavern appearance was on February 9th, 1961. Brian Epstein first saw them on November 9th, 1961. The Beatles' contract with EMI was signed May 9th, 1962. Their debut single, Let Me Do, was on Parlophone R4949. Their debut performance on Ed Sullivan was February 9th, 1964. John's second Sean son was born on October 9th. John was shot on December 8th in New York, but it was December 9th in Liverpool when the gun was fired. Their apartment at the Dakota was number 72, which 7 plus 2 equals 9. The hospital he was rushed to, the Roosevelt in Manhattan, both 9 letters, is located on 9th Avenue, etc. He also met Yoko on November 9th. During an interview in 2010, Yoko revealed that it was Paul at the height of his feud with John who was largely responsible for saving John and Yoko's marriage. Quote, I want the world to know that it was a very touching thing that he did for John. He was genuinely concerned about his old partner, even though John was not even asking for help. John, Paul, all of them were too proud to ask anything. He helped. John often said he didn't understand why Paul did this for us, but he did. Unquote. According to Yoko, Paul and Linda visited her in New York early in 1974, and they talked long into the night. Paul asked Yoko what would make her take John back, and she told him that if John courted her, she would perhaps consider it. Paul then visited John in LA to pass on what Yoko had said. John immediately returned to New York and made several attempts to woo her, including taking her to a Man Ray exhibition and to see a film. I find that very interesting. Man Ray was a crazy surrealist artist who was actually linked to the Black Dahlia. Google it. It's kind of creepy. Then one evening, after watching him perform at an Elton John concert, Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and meeting him backstage afterwards, she realized it could all begin again. Okay, so then the last card, I really did, I'm going over a lot of John's cards, but they're very interesting. It is the 10 of Words. John's ghost is peering down at the body, passing the hat around for donations like a beggar, or a crippled war veteran, or a street musician playing for change. If you look, both images are John, even though we know that that's really Paul on that coffin base uh, case. And so rather than 10 swords, the upper part of the card shows 10 repeated images of the gun that shot him, calling to mind the insane glut of guns in America. John was hit 5 times, 4 times in the back. When, and that's 5 plus 4 right there, again, 9. In the back, when NYPD showed up, Mark David Chapman was sitting on the sidewalk reading a copy of J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. The catcher in the rye, the phony must die, says the catcher in the rye. In Revolution 9, when John bellowed, "Rise!" the madman Charles Manson heard the call to rise up and start a race riot, while the fundamentalist Christian Mark Chapman heard rise, R-Y-E-S. Chapman said during his arrest that Salinger's book was his statement, convinced John that the Beatles were driven by a godless communist agenda that betrayed and misled kids. Chapman considered himself the catcher, or the savior of children, as described in the book. What do you guys think about that one? Oh, wow. That he was convinced that the Beatles were driven by a godless communist agenda that betrayed and misled children. Wow. Yeah. John had been plagued with doubt, fear, and self-recrimination all his life. During one particularly dark patch in the late 70s, John turned to Jesus for solace. He fought with Yoko over her practice of the dark arts and astonished friends by praising the Lord and writing overtly Christian songs such as Talking with Jesus. In 1979, John accompanied Yoko to Japan. While she met with family, John remained in the hotel room with all the lights off. He suffered terrible nightmares. He later told a friend, quote, "I'd lie in bed all day, not talk, not eat, just withdraw. The funny thing happened. I began to see these different parts of me. I felt like a hollow temple filled with many spirits, each one passing through me, each one inhabiting me for a little time and then leaving me to be replaced by another," unquote. This marked the end of John's personal interest in Jesus, and he wrote the song, "You Saved My Soul," addressed not to the Lord, but to Yoko Ono. In John's words, saved me from suicide. John saved not by Christ, but from him, nevertheless suffered from insecurity and depression, his only real joy coming from time spent with his son Sean. Meanwhile, the fundamentalist Christian Mark Chapman became so incensed that John was known to the world, while he remained a nobody, that he vowed to make John a nobody by killing him and becoming himself world famous. This violated numerous fundamental teachings of Jesus in the Bible, and Chapman struggled inwardly to keep his vow. He prayed to Satan for strength to kill John Lennon, and eventually heard a voice in his head chanting, "Do it, do it, do it." John didn't believe in the devil, but he believed in chaotic, hateful, and evil forces. In a tragic irony, had John become a born again Christian the year or two before, we don't know what might have become of his spiritual life, but his actual physical life would most likely have been spared, as Chapman would have seen John as a brother in Christ. Instead, a knower man robbed not only John of his life, but the world of his genius. Okay, so we've arrived at the last suit, which is the pennies or the pentacles. And we're going to look at and that is represented by Paul or Billy or McCartney. I will just say McCartney for diplomacy's sake. So let's look at the three of pennies. So McCartney and his semi-skilled collaborators in Wings, Linda and Denny Lane, take the place of the triangle in the Rider-Waite-Smith team, working on the cathedral. The lights above the fireplace behind them pick up the sculptural theme and direct our attention to the darker or more inward aspects of this card. Wings is very much McCartney's band, and he assumes the same position of eminence as the Rider-Waite-Smith's Three of Pentacles sculptor. The three of them gaze down together at a mystery, a cosmic craps table, a galactic casket, or a gateway to another dimension, which seems to depend on the roll of a die. Interesting. Okay, let me turn my page. Sorry, guys, I have to turn my page. So when John requested a divorce from the Beatles in September 1969, Paul suffered something of a nervous breakdown. Heartbroken and depressed, Paul began drinking excessively. To get himself out of it, he set up a simple recording studio in his Cavendish Avenue home, making simple 4-track recordings as forays into becoming a solo artist. A few months later, Paul took these 4-track recordings into Abbey Road Studios for overdubs and mastering under the pseudonym Billy Martin. Part Billy Shears, part George Martin. McCartney has been criticized for a paucity of musical ideas, but for an overabundance of them not fully realized. Over the years, much, if not all, of McCartney's solo work has been de facto, all McCartney all the time. Efforts, notably Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, Memory Almost Full, and McCartney's albums as The Fireman, Rushes, and Electric Arguments. One of the central ideas of the Three of Pennies card is the notion of apprenticeship and mastery, seen in McCartney's first album through his work with Wings up until the modern day. Yes, so now we're going to turn to the Eight of Pennies. I only have a few more to go through. And the Eight of Pennies. This image is from the cover of McCartney's solo album, Ram On, and shows McCartney shearing a ram and stacking up a pile of almost identical rams beside him. In the very early days of the Beatles, when they were the Silver Beatles, Paul chose the name Paul Ramon as a stage name, thinking it sounded vaguely French and exotic. When the Beatles finally split up, he referenced this alter ego to underscore his independence. One of the songs on the album is Ram On, which is about someone giving his heart to somebody soon, right away. Bread is used. So a ram symbolizes headstrong forward movement. Ancient British kings would wear ram's horns on their head as a symbol of power. Breads used for magical ceremonies were often made in the shape of a crescent, the astrological symbol for Aries, the first star sign in the zodiac. Whoop, whoop. The initiating force is a pair of ram's horns. They are shaped like crescent moons and were often ground up to be used as aphrodisiacs. Horns are used to symbolize cuckold husbands. Here, the partnership with John and the other Beatles. Horns of plenty or otherwise gave birth to the term horny. And there is perhaps a phallic quality to the Tower of Rams, suggesting that the accumulation of goods can sometimes be a sexual substitute. Ram is also the syllable used as a mantra in meditative chanting and is associated specifically with the opening of the third chakra, the center of dynamic vitality situated in the solar plexus. McCartney, as a solo artist, is remarkably prolific, perhaps too prolific. An example being an instrumental version of Ram recorded in 1971 but released in 1977 as Percy Thrills Thrillington. Yes. All right, guys. So I have 3 cards in the major arcana to go over, and then that's it. But these 3 cards were very cool looking and symbolic. So we're going to start off with the 7th arcana card, the Chariot. So this card represents the third in chronological line of official Beatles albums, A Hard Day's Night. This also is the title of the Beatles' first motion picture, which picks up the theatrical associations in the Rider-Waite-Smith Chariot card. Drawing on an early movement in the film when the boys jump onto the train to escape their overenthusiastic fans, in the center of the card, we see the Beatles pulling faces through the doorway of a train compartment. They are reacting to the confinement of their complete personalities within their public persona as the Beatles, just as they are contained within the compartment of a moving vehicle and captured in a movie that is itself made up of static frames of celluloid. Their faces also look like children's faces pressed against a sweet shop window. They were enjoying their fame immensely at this time. And that simple joy is captured in the mood of the film. The black and white sphinxes on the Rider-Waite-Smith card are replaced by repeated positive and negative versions of stills from the movie, reiterating the push me, pull you Ringoism of the album film's title. The star vehicle, the Chariot, is ruled astrologically by Cancer, but should the crab move left or right, as its nature, it is met with Paul's fictional grandfather, played by Wilfrid Bramall. Bramall, who was a constant source of frustration for the band in the film and slows down the action too, takes the place of the static wheels of the Rider-Waite-Smith Chariot. Despite the repeated claims that Bramall is a clean old man, he's a clean old man. He is clearly its inverse and something of a troublemaker. This may be a sly reference to the indignant father who hounded McCartney, claiming he was the father of his young daughter's unborn child. While considered a landmark film of modern music, it has no very profound message. Nevertheless, it is a good-natured example of how it is possible to present the Beatles as a band and yet allow them to stand out as individuals. Their anti-establishment attitudes also pointed to the direction the Beatles and the decade of the 60s would take, ushering in full-blown Beatlemania. The card of the album/movie encapsulates what would become the insolent reality of the Beatles, a world-weary shell on the outside, a tender family within. Cancer is ruled by the moon, the silver screen, suggesting all is not what it seems. All right, so next we're going to look at the Hermit. Yes, this is a very cool card. I like the way it looks. All right, so the Hermit card represents the fifth album in chronological sequence of the official Beatles release, Help. The album consisted mostly of songs featured in their second full-length motion picture of the same name. Here, all four Beatles stand on each other's shoulders to recreate the upright single figure of the Rider-Waite-Smith Hermit. Their balancing act conveys the mutual reliance and support that contributed to their unity. But such a tower is also somewhat fragile, and emptiness of the harsh white background exposes the band's ever-growing isolation. Instead of a lantern, McCartney holds up the golden logo of their record label Parlophone, an offshoot of EMI. The logo is round like a coin and bears the symbol of the British pound, illuminating the band's ever-growing success and their role as torchbearers of British culture, as seen in the previous card. Paul holds the coin because, in the minor arcana, he is the representative of the suit of pennies, but their sign language amounts to gibberish for show. The Beatles had famously been introduced to marijuana around this time by Bob Dylan, and John and George in particular were influenced by Dylan's language-based songwriting. Though stoned and prone to fits of giggling during the film of Help, the title song began as a genuine cry of distress. McCartney shines a commercial light on introspection through the singular backward glance of Yesterday, the first solo performance to appear on a Beatles album. This song obliquely associates the Hermit with the Sun card, where the album Yesterday and Today with its butcher cover art was originally titled Yesterday and Today, yesterday being in quotes. After the success of Yesterday and Paul's appearance on television to perform it alone, Brian Epstein was approached about the Beatles producing solo albums, but Brian resolutely rebuffed the notions, insisting the band was a unified whole. This connects the Hermit card with the High Priestess card and underscores their shared quality of integrity. In this deck, the High Priestess card is represented by Brian Epstein, actually. While this album looks back to musical achievements of the recent past, the Beatles' direction is always unstoppably forward. The Hermit created here by the acrobatic Beatles is like Hermes caduceus. They are their own medicine. Their shape suggests a tree, so far bearing one fruit, a golden apple perhaps, but soon to yield a cornucopia. The Hermit card is affiliated with Virgo, meaning self-possessed, and often personified by the goddess Astrea, the daughter of the Titans, whose emergence indicates the return of the golden age of man. This notion of completion and rebirth connects the hermit with Saturn. In the world card, but the first virgin Astrea, which translates literally as star maiden, the goddess of innocence, will come to fruition in the earthly new dawn of the justice card. All right, so last but not least is the Wheel of Fortune card. In place of the symbolically complex Rider-Waite-Smith wheel, the Beatles tarot version is apparently quite simple. The four lads look as though they are trapped in a laundrette tumble dryer. Their fame has now encompassed the whole round world, and they just lie here, watching the wheels and the world spinning round. The disposition of suits represented by four animals on the Rider-Waite-Smith card have been jumbled about. Moving counterclockwise, the Beatles shown are Ringo, McCartney, John, and George. Corresponding to the sticks, pennies, words, and cups. Corresponding to fire, earth, air, water, whereas the four Rider-Waite-Smith animals follow the conventional astrological order of fixed star signs: Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius. At the height of their powers, the Beatles had such energy and agency that they could turn such conventions of their heads. This card is ruled by Jupiter, god of good luck, expansion, and supreme authority. Because the Beatles' music was the center of is at the center of the Beatles' tarot, there is a record in the center of the Wheel of Fortune. It has a peculiar similarity to the Fool's Bindle. Vinyl gramophone records came in three sizes: LP, which is the long play, the EP, which is extended play, and the 45, the single. A single is called a 45 because it rotates on the turntable at a speed of 45 RPMs. That is 45 revolutions per minute. Again, 4 plus 5 is 9. 9 revolution 9. The larger LP spins at the slower speed of 33 and a third RPM. In fact, George released a solo album on his 33rd birthday with the title 33 and a third. In short, the card's records, like wheels inside wheels, signify both what allowed the Beatles to amass their fortunes and why they are destined to be remembered for their tunes. The main meaning of the Wheel of Fortune is the idea of chance, luck, and accident. This can relate to inspirational coincidences or creative accidents, which the Beatles were sensitive to and actively encouraged during the making of their music and other artistic projects. Artists in all fields recognize the value of liberating the artistic process from rigid intellectual control, of surrendering to the more fluid unpredictability of unconscious forces, of allowing randomness, synchronicity, and serendipity to occasionally direct their work. The shuffling and the reading of tarot cards operates on the same principle. Coincidences shake our scientific faith in randomness. They invariably bring with them a feeling of affirmation. The universe is not made of atoms, but entirely of coincidence, the vast majority of which go unheeded. The more alert we are, the more open we are to the infinite weave of patterns and connections. Yes, guys, so those are a few of the cards. This turned out to be quite a long video. If you're here with me at the end, thank you so much. You guys are so rad. I just find this deck very, very fascinating, and I will be doing readings with this deck in the future. Apologies, guys, for not getting to the table. I've just really wanted to put out these video presentations and get, a lot of the stuff that I've been reading and researching out to you guys. And I honestly haven't felt inspired or motivated. Like I haven't had the urge in me to to sit down at the table, for a certain subject or a certain reading, and I have to feel compelled to sit down at the table. I have done, of course, I do my intermittent card readings. I do them for my friends and I do them for myself. But those are more private readings, these big readings that I share with you guys and that are tapping into these serious, big events in our reality. That's kind of a different story. And so I promise when I get inspired to sit down at the table again, you guys will be the first to know. But otherwise, I'm just going to be putting out some videos for the time being. But I hope you'll still stick with me. I'm going to wrap up the Major Arcana series the next 2 weeks probably. And we'll see what happens after that. Thank you so much for being here, guys. Please like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. And I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.